Thank you, Anders. It's really great to be here, especially because we are here among friends of Ukraine. And I have to say that for me, this is very often a novelty because I'm very often among people in Europe that are not necessarily the most supportive of our dear friends in Ukraine. And to be here in the Baltic is always great, from seeing flags that support Ukraine to pretty much every practical help that you are giving. It's just fantastic. And so I just wanted to say that before I start my presentation. This presentation is going to be related to a project that we are implementing together with Tequil, and we have been working with Tequil for the past 5 years. And it's implemented in Bulgaria. There are 3 partner countries. One of them is Estonia, represented by Tequil. One of them is us. We are working both from Hungary and London and Brussels. And so one of the partner countries is Hungary, and like I said, the project is being implemented in Bulgaria. It's based on a previous project that started in 2020, and I'm going to say a few words about that one as well, because it's quite interesting, because Bulgaria is a very special case study when it comes to starting from very low in terms of being prepared, having finance, doing projects, etc. So I'm just going to say a very few words about ourselves. We are an SME. Like I said, we are based in Brussels currently. We have offices in Budapest and London. We also have colleagues. We had colleagues in Beijing, and now we have a colleague in Thailand. The reason why we are currently present in East Asia, Southeast Asia, is because we have been becoming much more involved in supply and value chain issues since 2019, and these are very relevant to energy efficiency and renewable energy investments in the housing sector, because as we heard, inflation has become terrible. A lot of the things that we used to do or we used to take for granted, like payback periods of 20 years, have disappeared suddenly, and apparently it's here to stay, and there are different methods to reduce the cost. But one of the problems that is going to persist in the next few years is going to be problems related to dependency on other regions on the globe. And so in the last 5 years, we have very actively started looking at helping different countries regionalize more, finding resources locally and in the region, trying to reduce the costs by increasing the scales. And particularly here in the Baltic, I think it's one region where you should really think about working more cohesively and more strongly together in order to reduce the costs that we have heard are really immense and prohibitive, actually, if you look only at payback periods. And so we have been focusing a lot on, like I said, on energy efficiency and renewable energy in the housing sector, mostly from the perspective of the finance and policy making, but also we do scientific research. With Tonico, we are just preparing a paper on the social housing sector problems, and we are doing a comparative study on behavior and other issues and the split incentive problems that social housing suffers from in Denmark, the UK, and Italy, and it's going to be published in a few months. I just wanted to mention that just simply because we are an SME, but we do cover a wide variety of skills, and we have colleagues from several European countries, and like I said, we are paying a lot of attention now on East Asia and Southeast Asia because of the Chinese dominance. And so let's just go to the project. Like I said, it's focused in Bulgaria because Bulgaria started from pretty much zero a few years ago. They had very few implemented projects. Very few projects that were implemented were done entirely from 100% grants. They don't have any financial product for multi-apartment buildings. What else? They don't have social housing associations. They don't have any kind of housing associations. They don't have a legislation like we heard in Latvia that obliges the buildings to function as a legal entity, which to me is always a curious issue because any multi-apartment buildings deals with common wealth. And because it deals with the common wealth, it should be the obligation of the state to intervene as a neutral third party to mediate any kind of conflict and also to deal with questions of taxation, income, because a building can generate income, it has expenses, etc. So in Bulgaria, all of these issues were really terrible, and when we started working with Akil around 2020, but also in the preparation before that, we realized that there is going to be a lot of issues. So in the previous project, which is called INSPIRenov, which we closed in 2022, we focused on transferring knowledge and skills from Estonia and Hungary to Bulgaria, and we were dealing with questions like legislation, contracts, all kinds of other aspects of renovations. And now, in the second project, which is called INSPIRenov, which has started last year and it's going to last for another 2 years, we are dealing with building the financial structures within the banks themselves, that is creating loans, looking at how the loans could be softened, and so on. So basically now we are in the process of doing a lot of the work that has been done in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Hungary a long time ago. And so we are learning a lot from this experience because it's, like I said, a very raw environment in the sense that there was not a lot of knowledge before we came with INSPIrenov. And since then, things have improved slightly, and we are trying to move ahead. The kind of model that we have been pushing for the past 20 years is broadly, you can represent it like that. It's about facilitating loans from banks because, as we know, public funds are simply not enough. I know that the Commission came up with a new report this year, and also they have been publishing something about it last year, where they were trying to assess how much private funding has to go into the building sector in order to refurbish everything in Europe, and it's around 90% of all the investments. So with every single amount of cash that the public authorities have all over Europe, it's hardly enough for 10% of the buildings. So it's going to take a lot of private funds. And there are different ways to facilitate bank lending, and some of them relate to guarantees, other relates to interest rate subsidies, etc., etc. The point is to soften the loans somehow, and also to create a capacity within the banks to issue this type of special loans, for example, for multi-residential apartment buildings, because that's an issue that, like I said, in Bulgaria, they don't have a history of that. In the previous project, we introduced this blueprint for what it would look like in general, a market-based approach in Bulgaria. And of course, it's market-based only in the sense that it does have a blended finance element to it. But it would allow the banks to finally construct loan schemes and push those loan schemes to the market. So, and it would allow them to start building a market that doesn't exist for now. And that's a big challenge. And currently in INSPIrenov, we are working with a commercial bank. That's going to happen in the next 2 years, basically. And the reason why we are pushing so hard for the private sides of the finance is because we have been, this is from one of our research paper, and I know it's not very, it's not very, I just put it there just for you to understand that the greatest part of pretty much every program that we analyzed over the past 25 years always goes back to commercial loans. And so whether you like it or not, it's just a way to go forward. And in some countries, this is a big issue because people still expect to receive handouts. And receiving handouts is it's not going to work. So currently, for example, in Bulgaria, they have been doing some refurbishments, like I said, from state funds. They have refurbished maybe around 200 buildings per year, so very few buildings. They are far away from their targets. At the current rate, it would take them probably around 100, over 100 years to refurbish anything. So it's the reason why loans dominate every other scheme pretty much everywhere where there are some results is because without them there is simply no scale. And so the reasons I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hungarian example is not because it relied on state grants. It did rely a little bit on state grants, and it did rely on guarantees. The whole process started at in the 90s. One of my colleagues, Annika, who is here, she has been working for the World Bank back then, and they started providing guarantees, etc., like I said, in the last years of the 90s, and until about 2005, they have achieved quite a lot. But the most important thing is that whatever has been refurbished by 2010, that was done with some help. Most of the help came around to 30% of the grant. So the loan was always the biggest share. And what's much more important is that since 2010, we had no state subsidies for multi-apartment buildings. So every single every single building that has been refurbished since then has been done basically through a market-based mechanism entirely. And so by 2010, the banks had such a large market in the energy efficiency renovation whatever market, is that that they couldn't just go back. So what happened is that when the grants stopped, the rate at which the renovation happened slowed down, but it never stopped. And since then, it has advanced considerably, especially considering that in Hungary, the prefabricated types of buildings are in huge number compared to other countries. So we have hundreds of thousands of buildings. And then there are other multi-apartment buildings that are not prefabricated, that are historic buildings from the end of the 19th century and historic buildings from the beginning of the 20th century. These are usually brick buildings, and there was a lot of refurbishment happening there as well, although not as much as in the prefabricated buildings. And the reason for this is because refurbishing historic buildings, it's much more difficult. And so since 2010, there are schemes in Hungary that are targeted at single homes. So they have achieved some successes there. But like I said, since then, we do not have any support in Hungary for this. So you have to imagine in a situation where you go from introducing a scheme that leverages public money to a point where commercial banks can do this job and on their own. So basically, housing associations or condominium associations can apply for the loan themselves with minimum amount of savings, and then they can start the whole process themselves and they can manage the whole process because there are intermediary companies, there are project management companies, etc. One of the end results of this is that the speed at which you do refurbishment is greatly enhanced compared to when you have a much more protective approach from the state. And the other thing is that because the responsibility of the owners is increased to a much higher level, their awareness has been increased and also their participation in the process has increased. Also, there are players on the market, not only the commercial banks, that are doing the whole selling process. So it's not necessarily the state or state agencies that are being involved. Actually, from 2010, that is absolutely not the case. So they are not involved at all. So there are always market players that are interested in doing this selling, in managing, and even supervising the quality of the refurbishment, even 5 to 10 years after the project has been implemented. So our company, when it started in 2005 in Hungary, we managed refurbishment projects. And so our team leader that used to do this type of jobs, she goes back to these houses even after 10 years, checking how the results have happened, for example, looking at how the inflation and the price effects on energy, etc., has been impacting the return and the ability of people to pay their monthly bills. Because this is one area where a lot of people make a lot of confusion, is that payback period is not the same thing as having the ability to pay back your loan today. That is, having the ability to pay lesser amounts today than you did yesterday. And in many countries this was, and especially in Hungary, this was the selling point, because a lot of the refurbishment are unimaginably long in terms of total payback periods. So what people were curious about is by how much my expenses will be reduced tomorrow. So if you can reduce your, including with the loan repayment. So that's how you have to imagine it. And because in Hungary the market was very strong and didn't need the help of the state, a lot of this has been happening ever since then. And I have to say that I am yet to find another similar example in another country where you have, like I said, owners and condominium associations and the market driving the issue. Yes, so with the new project, which we are doing right now, like I said, I'm working continuously with Anu from Ekil, is that we have been doing a lot of mapping, and we are still in the process of doing a lot of mapping in Bulgaria, because we started the whole technical, this is a huge technical assistance project, INSPIRenov. We are helping the local banks and the local stakeholders to create energy efficiency loans and to create the whole market for it. And so what we did until now in the past 1 year is that we are trying to map the very detailed financial habits of homeowners that goes beyond what we know from statistics. And so we are doing a very specially designed surveys of 1,000 Bulgarian households. And then we are also looking at all the commercial banks that are active in any type of loan. And because, like I said, they don't have energy efficiency loans for apartment buildings, they do have some mortgage loans that you could call green. And so we are looking at all of this product in detail. We are surveying them, and then we are going to build a model of what is going to happen in the next few years with the bank in terms of the kind of help that we will give them, how they can increase their internal capacity, how they can design the model, how they can design the marketing, what will happen once there isn't enough help from the state, for example, what happens if the state continues to support only 100% grants, which is what they did until now, and so on. So we are looking at all of these things at the moment, and with Ekil we are also have invented this special way of monitoring ourselves in the project, which is not very typical for this type of EU-funded project, is that we have one of our partners whose main role, which is Ekil, is to monitor the whole process and note down the whole process with all the difficulties, failures, conflicts, discussions, debates, shouting, everything that goes around when you are actually trying to develop a completely new market for a country where such things don't exist. So, and through this process, we are going to gain a lot of insight in difficulties that we already know, but also in difficulties that we are yet to face. And also, we will try to distill this knowledge and try to channel this knowledge towards what we call an INSPIRenov alliance, which is going to try to attract possible countries where these lessons can be used, even if they are ahead of Bulgaria in terms of development, but especially if they are at similar levels or a little bit ahead or even behind them. So it's a promising project. I thought when we were starting writing the application that it's going to be very challenging, and it is very challenging, both because of the extremely difficult situation that we have in Bulgaria, like I said, the non-existence of a proper condominium legislation, the non-obligation of a condominium to function as a legal entity, the banks having no experience whatsoever of lending to condominiums, all of these things. And so the expectation of the population to receive 100% grants, which apparently it is an anecdotal issue for some of them. But it's mostly because no one deals with the issue. So I'm not going to have too much time. I will try to finish. So what we are going to do in the next 2 years, we are going to work a lot with the banks. We are going to have technical working groups. And like I said, we are monitoring everything and trying to distill the knowledge and bring it back to whichever country needs it. So in the next few months, we are going to build a stronger network for this project and then take it from there. So yeah, the INSPIRenov Alliance. In Bulgaria especially, we are focusing on questions of moral hazards and market distortions of subsidies because, like, in some cases, naturally, you need subsidies, but they always carry a lot of problems. For example, in the same building, let's imagine that there is one building in Sofia, and that building received 100% grant. In that building, there are a few people, or there are a few households that are energy poor and would deserve some amount of help. Then there are some people which are a little bit higher and could probably do it on their own. And then there are people who are extremely rich, and maybe they have 1 or 2 apartments in that building. And giving a whole grant to that whole building, if you look at it, it's just terrible. And so I've been trying to push this idea that you have to differentiate not only in terms of the region, etc., but you have to be very selective, and you really, really have to pay attention to the principle of budget neutrality. That is, any single support that you have to give to a market, it has to come back through taxes. If it doesn't come back to taxes, you are distorting the market and you are creating more problems than what you are actually solving. So when you are designing anything in any of your countries, do think about this issue. If the situation is very terrible, like when you are under constant fire and war, etc., naturally you have completely different worries, so to speak. But when you are rebuilding and refurbishing, then you do have an opportunity to do it in a sustainable fashion and to be careful that people don't abuse the system that you are creating who do not deserve it, and that when you are giving support, you are not creating more problems than what you are solving. So hopefully I wasn't too long, and we still have some time for the discussion. Thank you.